Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. We've got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. First and foremost, guys, I'm your host, Marcus Vargas, and I hope you all are doing well. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're staying safe and staying indoors. Now, I do want to say before we get started here today, I am feeling a bit under the weather, so I might sound a little stuffy. Hopefully, it doesn't take away too much from the show. I have some water with me here, just in case I need it throughout the show. But, you know, like they say, the show must go on, so here I am. Now, guys, we got a jam-packed show for you today, as we always do. But I want to get started talking about recently the NFL came out with their all-decade list, from 2010 to 2020. And I want to first talk about probably the biggest snub on this list. The two quarterbacks were announced for the all-decade team, and they were Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Now, you may have noticed some names off of that list, some big ones, Russell Wilson's not on there, Eli Manning, while not the best quarterback ever, 2 Super Bowls, Pittsburgh Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger, some big names, but also how about Drew Brees? I mean, it seems pretty ridiculous that Drew Brees is getting snubbed from this list, and I understand they only do 2 quarterbacks, but hey, I mean, I'd have made an exception taking 3 quarterbacks so you can add Drew Brees to this list. I mean, honestly, one could argue that he deserves a spot over Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady's basically a shoo-in. You're not going to take that spot from me. He has so many Super Bowls, a few in this decade as well, so, he's not taking that spot. However, between 2010 and 2019, Drew Brees had 46,770 passing yards and 345 touchdowns. Brady had 43,700 and some change and 316 touchdowns. Rodgers had 38,000 and some change and 305 touchdowns. So he led both of those in yards and touchdowns, but somehow snubbed from this list. Now, see, this is my biggest problem with the whole GOAT discussion. Who's the greatest of all time, for those of you that don't know the term GOAT. Now, all of my life I've had these sorts of discussions, right? When I was a kid, most often it was, who's the best basketball player ever? Is it LeBron or Michael Jordan? I think that's, definitely one of the biggest ones. But when we talk about GOATs, people talk about the greatest boxer ever. It's, to me, I hate that discussion because there is no way to name one greatest of all time at anything. Or it's just extremely difficult. And the reason I say this is because there's so many different, even to a combat sport where it's one-on-one, there's so many different styles to compete in your sport that it's so hard to compare 2 players. Unless, everyone was set to a rigid, you have to follow these rules, you have to play this way and this way only, then can you say, well, this was the greatest of all time at that. It's very difficult to say, this guy's better than the other because he did this. Oh, but what about when this guy did this? Oh, well, what about when this guy did this? It's tough. So I like to say, when I talk about the greatest, I talk about the greatest players, plural, of all time. I don't, when you get into the greatest quarterback of all time discussion, greatest basketball player, what have you, people always tend to jump to who won the most. Now, what I hate is, people always say, well, Jordan has 6 rings. Jordan has 6 rings. Well, then by that case, Bill Russell should be the greatest player of all time. They always use that as Jordan has more rings than LeBron. Well, Bill Russell has more rings than Jordan, so does that mean he's the best ever? No, it gets very complicated. And while, Tom Brady has all those Super Bowls, he's a great leader, he's clutch, you can't just say that those Super Bowls means he's the greatest quarterback ever, because being a quarterback is more than just winning. You know what I mean? Is he the greatest passer of all time? Very arguable. He's not very mobile. He can't throw on the run like a guy like Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, make these crazy off-schedule improv throws. I'd say that's a great, that's an attribute of the greatest quarterback of all time. So that's what it bothers me about these sorts of lists, because that's why Tom Brady's always on these lists, the Super Bowls. I'm interested to see if you took all these Super Bowls, if you gave Tom Brady one Super Bowl in his 20 years, how people would be talking about him if they'd even have him as a, top quarterback of all time. It's very, very interesting. The one thing, too, when you talk about a greatest player, greatest quarterback of all time, we have to remember that quarterback is throwing to receivers that have to catch the ball. That quarterback's giving the ball to a running back that has to be successful. That quarterback relies on his defense for victories. Let's be real here, guys. Without the top 10 defenses that Bill Belichick has fielded for Tom Brady, he would have no Super Bowls. Sorry, that's just the plain truth. We saw Patrick Mahomes last season lose a ton of games unless he scored 35 or more points. It just doesn't make any sense. By that regard, Patrick Mahomes is the greatest quarterback of all time. So it's always, so convoluted and complex, these discussions. It's a shame that Drew Brees is not on this list. He's the all-time leader in pass yards and touchdowns. It doesn't make any sense. And it just feels like, it's just more, Drew Brees gets snubbed all the time. When the greatest of all time discussion even comes around, I barely ever hear Drew Brees being mentioned. I think he's one of the most slept-on quarterbacks ever. He was slept on because of his height. The Chargers, gave up on him essentially. He was reborn in New Orleans, and, he has a Super Bowl, guys. Let's not forget that. He did win a Super Bowl. So I understand the continued success is not there, but how can you cannot blame Drew Brees. How can you blame the guy who has led the league in passing yards, led the history of the NFL, guys? There have been so many great quarterbacks, so many amazing quarterbacks that people put above him. He has more yards than them. He has more touchdowns than them. It's not his fault his defenses have not been the best. You know what I mean? It's just tough. And I hate when people have these discussions and they try to say that one person is so much better than the other person just because they've won games, when there are 51 other guys on the roster that help ensure those victories as well. No one person can take over a game in football in a vacuum. A running back has to rely on the offensive line to create holes. He can't go out there and, split the Red Sea and just run through it himself. He needs those guys to block for him and do their job correctly so that he can bust through a hole, and then he can do his job, make moves one-on-one, etc., etc. If receivers aren't getting open, the quarterback is going to struggle. Interestingly enough, when the receivers aren't getting open, we give that excuse to Tom Brady. However, on other teams, when people have no names, such as Aaron Rodgers, who was throwing to basically no one. Carson Wentz was throwing to basically no one. I mean, Aaron Rodgers had Devontae Adams, but the games he missed is what I'm talking about. Carson Wentz is throwing to no one. We don't give them those same excuses. Why is that? It's very, very frustrating. No one just wants to bring up the plain truth that maybe it was because Tom Brady's age. Maybe he's lost a step. No, we want to say that he's immortal, and it's his receivers' fault. They weren't getting open enough. Julian Edelman had all these drops, so on and so forth. Every quarterback has a wide receiver that leads the league in drops every year, but we never hear the excuses for them that we hear for Tom Brady. Sorry, I know I got off on a bit of a tangent here, but the point is the unfair treatment of certain players over others. It's frustrating at times because I know Drew Brees is a guy who deserves a lot of credit. He deserves the recognition. He definitely, when Eli Manning, decided he was done, that's it. People are talking about, does he deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? And in some discussions, it feels like they just say, yeah, because of the Super Bowls. So that's my take on it, guys. Yeah, sorry to drag you along for that long, but it's a very interesting topic, and I think one that is definitely polarizing, one that I think is sort of useless, in my opinion. You can never tell. There's always going to be a large group of people saying this person's the greatest and the other group saying this person's the greatest, and you'll never change anyone's mind. So it's a useless discussion. It never really leads to one person changing another's mind, and it goes on forever. But the point of this segment is to say Drew Brees was most definitely snubbed. He should have been included on this list. I don't care if they only do 2 quarterbacks. Add another quarterback to your list. There's no reason you can't, and yeah, it'll make us all happy. And it's not like he doesn't deserve it, you know what I mean? Okay, he hasn't won Super Bowl, he hasn't won in a long time, but the guy's a great quarterback. Okay, and he's done it against the odds in a city where, that's dealt with so much disaster, and he's given them hope and all this other great stuff. But I mean, hey guys, that's it for this first segment. We're going to go into a short break really quickly here, and then I want to talk some more about this list because it is interesting. So when we get back, we'll talk about the all-decade list some more. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we bring it back. Still talking about the NFL's all-decade list they released recently. We just got done talking about Drew Brees and how he was most definitely snubbed. And I don't want to keep going with snubs because, it feels like you could definitely talk forever about it. I might bring up a few more. But however, I don't want to keep going because anyone could argue that that hundreds of players were snubbed from this list. So, something that can, kind of find no end. So what I do want to talk about now, though, is a player on this list who I think I don't think it's, he should be off of this list for someone else. However, Antonia Brown made this list. And I think this is one of the most interesting players on the list. Here's why. Terrell Owens is arguably, he's one of the greatest receivers of all time. However, he was not a first ballot Hall of Famer. Now, a lot of people like to say that that's because of his behavior in the locker room. And, because, like people called him T.O. I know Skip Bayless called him Team Obliterator. His attitude, his swag, it didn't necessarily align with, being professional, et cetera, sort of like that Allen Iverson type, But why does Antonio Brown get to make a list like this after he's done so much, to me, worse than Terrell Owens? It doesn't make any sense. Antonio Brown not only, destroyed locker rooms, was disrespectful to people, hurled racial slurs at, his GM, acted like he was invincible. You know, he's done things way, way worse. You know, if this is another thing that frustrates me. I guess today is it's a frustration show. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm under the weather. It just makes me want to talk about all this stuff. But, you know, excuse me. If you're a celebrity, you know, it's easy to see why celebrities think that they're invincible. And a lot of times it's because the world allows them to be. Now, Antonia Brown threw furniture out of a hotel window, out of his condo, some crazy amount of stories up, and it landed on a pool deck near a child. Now, it seems kind of crazy. Like, you know, it seems that people are desensitized from this, but, like, do we realize that had he, you know, just been a little off, he would have murdered an innocent child? You know, I don't think people talk about this enough. Like, Antonia Brown hurled furniture to, let's say, all these stories up, and it could have killed someone had it just been, you know, a couple feet to the left, let's say. You know, and if you see the video, the kid is not that far from the furniture. So, you know, when you're that high up, you don't have to make that much of an adjustment to move several feet when something hits the ground. That's really scary to think about. You know, a player in the National Football League is supposed to be a professional, supposed to be, you know, I mean, he doesn't have to be eloquent, but you expect them, you know, have some, you know, a good demeanor, you know, some decorum and you know, act as a professional. You know, I could be flipping burgers at McDonald's, and if I did something like this, I'd be out of a job the next day once my manager found out about it. No matter how, I could be the best burger flipper in the world. I could flip 1,000 burgers in an hour, and you know, it doesn't matter. So why is that okay for a player in the National Football League? You know, as I've said before, I used to love Antonio Brown. I used to love watching him play. I thought he, you know, and I'm a Chiefs fan. He would destroy us, you know, and I'd be like, man, this guy is so freaking good. He is just otherworldly, and he's not, you know, he's not 6'4", huge guy. You know, he's a smaller guy. He just runs routes beautifully, and he's just, you know, amazing. But, you know, after his true colors showed, you know, it's just, I don't think he deserves any of this. And I understand, you know, things are based on talent. I get that. However, why was T.O. not a first ballot Hall of Famer then if those sorts of awards are based on talent? So to keep consistent with that sort of notion, Antonio Brown shouldn't be on this list. He's done way too many things. You know, the sexual harassment, assault allegations against him. You know, he threatened the woman who put those allegations against him in text messages, threats against her family, her children, on video, you know, cursing at cops and over, you know, things that just seem trivial in the life of an NFL player. It's just, in a life of someone who has all that money, to be acting this way, it doesn't make any sense. You know, he has the assault charges pending for the truck driver, I believe it was, a moving truck driver. It's so many things so recently. To put Antonio Brown on this list just seems like a slap in the face. This is like, here, Antonio, here's your ego boost for the day, because that's the type of person he is. He does not see all of the bad things that he's done. He always just gives fake apologies. He's, you know, poisoned numerous locker rooms. He's broken so many relationships with people who have, you know, given him opportunities, and he's just acted a fool. He doesn't deserve any of this recognition. This is basically so he can go tweet, "I'm out of the league and look at me, I'm on the all-decade list." You know, this is just giving us, I guess, something else to talk about. I mean, I guess, hey, it works for me, but no, he doesn't deserve to be on this list, and I shouldn't even be talking about him on this list right now because of what he's done. Sure, he's a great player, but that doesn't just disqualify you from being condemned. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. To me, it's just a joke, and he doesn't deserve to be on this list. I think I could go on forever about it, but, you know, this continues the Antonio Brown saga, in my opinion. You know, everybody's been... Here's the thing, too. Just another thing to add on. Everyone's been... If we think about this, and I'm guilty of this, too. So I'm not going to act like I'm some, you know, super righteous guy, but, everyone's had their eye on Antonio Brown. Where is he going to go? Where is he going to land? Oh, man, if he lands with Tom Brady in Tampa, that'd be lethal. They have 3 crazy wide receivers. Of course, there's, that other opinion that they couldn't, spread the ball, that, what have you. But he doesn't deserve any of this attention. And part of the problem is that, the media gives him this attention because that's exactly what he wants and that's exactly what he needs. As long as Antonio's name is in our mouths as, podcasters and show hosts and analysts, then that's what he needs. It's the day that we stop talking about Antonio Brown that we finally see all of this come to an end. The more we talk about him, the more we fuel his ego, the more we fuel his campaign to get back into the NFL, and the more we make the situation worse. He's had plenty chances. He should have taken his chance with John Gruden on the Raiders. He gave up so much money, so much guaranteed money, just because he has such a big ego, because he thinks he can do whatever he wants. And, I don't have to show up for practices. I don't have to show up for meetings if I don't want to. He basically lost out on $30 million guaranteed, was it? That's just the kind of guy he is. So at the end of the day, guys, Antonio Brown doesn't even deserve a chance to the NFL again, let alone being on this list. I think putting him on this list was sort of puts a little taint mark on the list. I don't like it. It's a smudge. And I will be the first to say, yes, Antonio Brown on a talent only basis deserves to be on this list, but this list is not just about, we know this list is not just about talent only. Drew Brees is not on this list for talent only. He's not on this list because of his numbers only, and that is the only reason Antonio Brown is on this list, guys. He's not on here because he's a great leader. He's not on here because he's a great team player. He's not all about teamwork makes the dream work. He's just about me, myself, my squad, my money. So it doesn't make sense. But it is what it is. I say that a lot here on the show. It is what it is. So with that, guys, we'll take a short break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the new uniform changes that we saw with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons. And, if some other teams should maybe follow suit. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We just got done talking some interesting topics on the NFL's all-decade team list, and now we move on. Sort of some in other news type stuff. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta Falcons have recently revealed new uniforms. Now, I love this. I talked about, I'm sure I've mentioned previously on the show here that, I definitely talked about the Tampa Bay's creamsicle uniforms and how I think that'd be awesome, and how I think, a lot of NL teams should be considering new alternate uniforms. Of course, they can stick to their traditional home and away. But having, besides some of the lame color rushes, like the all whites, maybe have some sort of, more pop, more pizzazz, to their uniforms. And, I like this move by the Bucs and the Falcons, and here's why. Mostly because, hold on a second, excuse me. So I take some water there. Mostly because in Tampa Bay, they are now, it's a new era, right? Tom Brady's here. Their defense is not too bad. Their offense looks insane as of right now on paper. It's sort of like the Brown situation here where we're all like, whoa, look at this team. And, not having a guy that's going to throw 30 picks. Bruce Arians is here. It feels like perfect timing for a new uniform. Not to mention, the color schemes are throwing it back to when, Tampa Bay saw success, when they went and won a Super Bowl. And, they're doing it in a modern way. It doesn't look exactly like that. But it's really cool. It's like they're invoking that spirit from that team. And basically, this is our uniform for our newest Super Bowl run. One thing I really do love about this uniform is the brown on brown. I think that's awesome. I know the Cleveland Browns also have a brown on brown, but the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Browns, it's a bit different. There's different shades to it, more like a subtle gray shade to the brown, if you get what I'm saying. And it's just more clean. There's not a lot of other secondary colors. And to me, it's very, very different. A lot of people hate the red on brown and things like that, but I think that their uniforms are pretty sweet. And mostly because because of the notion. A lot of teams stay with the same uniforms forever. Being a Kansas City Chiefs fan, I know that. And it works. It works though, but I think, it feels like these new Tampa Bay Buck uniforms, it's like 2 color rushes, and then they're old, the home with the red and the brown. So it looks really cool. It looks really clean. The brown, like I said, I love it. The white is very cool as well. And who knows, maybe, with all this hype and all that, they'll bring back the creamsicle uniforms that everybody's been dying for with a modern twist. I think that would be really, really cool if they did that as well. Now, one thing I do want to mention too is that they finally changed their numbers, because a lot of people complain that their numbers looked like alarm clock numbers, which was true. If you guys have seen like an old school alarm clock, the numbers, like every line of a number is separated, and that's exactly how the Tampa Bay Buccaneers old uniform numbers look. So it's definitely cool that they changed it from that. Now, I want to move on to the Atlanta Falcons uniforms, and mostly because, it's sort of similar to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They're cool. They're very, very clean. They have the all white, which I think is very clean. They have the all black on black. I think that's also dope. But the one that I really want to talk about here is the gradient uniform. I think that that's just awesome. It's definitely unique. There's nothing, there's not uniforms in the NFL like this. I think this is their Rise Up alternate uniform, which I think also one fits the name and the motto, and I think it's so original. Something like this feels like maybe it should be in a college uniform or in a different football league, like an XFL or something like that, but I really, really like the move the Atlanta Falcons made here. Hopefully they can usher in, an era of more success. After their Super Bowl run, it seems to have all fallen apart and they just keep underperforming, but their new uniforms are awesome. Except they've changed the home uniform from red to black, which I think is, I don't know how I feel about that, because I do like the red for the Falcons. Maybe they could have made the red match their logo more, because their logo is not as bright of a red as the uniform suggests. So I figured that they might have made it more of a, like a burnt red, maybe like a more maroon kind of red, like their Falcon has. It's not a maroon, but it's just a bit darker than the uniforms are. It's more of a blood red. But the gradient uniforms are really, really dope. And I really want to see other teams follow their lead. I really, really like this kind of stuff. I don't think, teams should just abandon their tradition, abandon their culture. But there are a lot of teams that have been stuck in the past with the same uniforms forever. Just to name a few, the Carolina Panthers are in desperate need of uniform upgrades. I think they have a color scheme to, possibly have some of the best uniforms in the NFL. That they have that baby blue type, turquoise-ish blue with the black and the gray, but their uniforms are stuck in like the 1970s or something. It just looks very old with the silver helmet and the bland striping. That's pretty lame. Another team, the New England Patriots, actually could use a modification on some of their uniforms. The stripes on the shoulders don't match the stripes on the pants. And we've been seeing the same thing for basically 20 years. Also, they have that wonderful red alternate uniform. I love that uniform with the old school logo. It's a great uniform. I think they should use that more often. I do like their color rush, but it's just that navy blue but it gives it's a more pizzazz. And one other team that I think could also use a uniform upgrade, the Arizona Cardinals, and I think it's perfect timing. They just brought in Kyler Murray. They just got DeAndre Hopkins, that amazing wide receiver. It just feels like a new era in Arizona, and they definitely need to upgrade their uniforms. Their uniforms are just, honestly, they're outdated. They're pretty ugly. That red on the white, the way it's just, they have the stripes all down the shoulders and side, and it's mostly white. Usually, it's either black and white, red and white, or that weird one with the stripes all down the side. I don't think it's very, very clean. It's not updated. It feels outdated. Their helmets look strange when paired against the uniforms, just white with the red little cardinal there. I think, a lot of teams could definitely use some updates, but I think right now, Panthers, Cardinals, and Patriots, all entering new eras of their franchise, could definitely use some updated uniforms. So with that, we're going to take a short break. And when we get back, we're going to talk some fantasy football, guys. So stay tuned. We'll be right back right after this short break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, guys, we just got done talking about these cool new uniform changes that are happening in the NFL, and now we're going to move on to some fantasy football. Now, of course, people might be thinking this is a fantasy football show. Why don't we always talk fantasy football? Well, here we do like to address some other trending topics in the NFL, especially since it's the NFL offseason. We all know there's not much going on. So, while we're in the offseason, we do change gears more often, and we definitely talk about topics that may not relate to fantasy football. However, we try as much as we can to discuss fantasy football topics. So, now that that's settled, we're back here with some fantasy football busts for the 2020 season. We recently did fantasy football breakout candidates, and now I want to continue here just real quick with some, not as big of a focus on these guys as last show, but some busts. And guys, I want to start with a running back here because he's on a very run-heavy team, but I don't think he's going to succeed that much next year. Mark Ingram, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the first reason is because he's 30 years old. That's just kind of plain and simple. We all know that the shelf life for running backs in the NFL is much shorter than a lot of other positions, And, it seems like once you hit that 30-year-old mark, the regression really kicks in, one. Secondly, teams don't believe in you as much because they know you're older. And unless you're Frank Gore, who's like a walking zombie, it's very, very hard to keep up production the older and older you get. Also, Adrian Peterson, he's also a zombie, man. The guy just keeps going. Now, last season, Mark Ingram had fewer than 40% of the Ravens' rush attempts, and he had only 2 targets a game. Those were his averages on the year. That right there is not even, no, that's not attractive for a regular fantasy football running back. It just so happened that he was hyper efficient with the touches he got. He had 15 touchdowns on 228 touches. That's pretty insane. There's running backs that get 300 rushes a year that don't have 15 touchdowns, let alone touches. So it's pretty crazy, and there's no way he keeps it up. There's probably, he had 5 receiving touchdowns. I don't even think he gets, he maybe gets 3 next season. I feel like at this point, some people even have the Baltimore Ravens drafting a running back. It feels like Mark Ingram will be slowly faded out. Gus Edwards, was really looking sharp last year. Whenever he was running the ball, it seemed like he picked up 10 yards. He had burst. He was quick, powerful. And again, Lamar Jackson's taking so many touches away from the running back that the running back position in Baltimore is not even that attractive to begin with in fantasy football. Mark Ingram just happened to be extremely efficient with his touches, and there's no way that is sustainable. So I'm definitely out on Mark Ingram as of right now. I don't even know, I'd probably put him on my bench because I believe that, in that offense with, a young guy up and coming, the quarterback taking a ton of touches, a ton of yards, that he's definitely a bust candidate. Now, another bust candidate I have here is actually a wide receiver, Mike Williams of the Los Angeles Chargers. And I'm mostly putting him on this list because of a personal bone to pick I have with Mike Williams, because I drafted him last year with the utmost confidence that he was going to be a great fantasy football wide receiver and he was going to break out. A lot of people thought he would. He's great at jump balls. I've seen what he's done to Kansas City in multiple games, multiple occasions. And, I said this guy's going to be really good opposite Keenan Allen with Phillip Rivers just going up there getting balls. Of course, that did not happen. Last year, he only had 10.3 fantasy points per game. Wasn't anything relevant for fantasy football's sake. And I think now with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, he's just even more relevant. Tyrod Taylor is, he's definitely going to take care of the ball more Phillip Rivers, I believe, but he's not this crazy explosive guy. He's not going to be launching the ball downfield to Mike Evans. I don't think he's a guy who's going to make, insane plays and throw those jump balls for Mike Williams to make, 50, 40 yards down the field. So it looks like, honestly, for both wide receivers in LA, regression is coming because, they're either going to have Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, or if he does horrible, they're probably going to have some backup quarterback that's most likely a rookie. If they draft one, people are saying they might get Justin Herbert. Who knows? Tua might slip. So it's just not looking too good in the quarterback room there. So for that reason, I think Mike Williams is going to be a huge bust. Not that he was anything insane last season, but people still believe in him. He's a very physical guy, goes up and gets the ball. But yeah, definitely a bust. Now, another bust I have here on this list that I've also had on my fantasy football team. It was painful. Kerryon Johnson of the Detroit Lions. Now, honestly, the reason why I think he's going to be a bust next season is because I don't believe in his health, and I don't believe that team believes in his health. The reason being, he's missed 14 games in his first 2 years in the league, and I really don't believe that the Lions, not that I believe that they're the greatest franchise, but do you really want to give the workhorse duties? Because honestly, what they need in Detroit is a workhorse. They need an every down back, a bell cow back to just carry them. Honestly, they haven't had a great running back in how long? They need a guy who's going to be able to lift the team up. They need a guy like Dalvin Cook. They need a guy like, Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, a guy who's going to give them a ton of yards and be able to be out there. You know, one of the most underrated attributes or abilities for NFL players is availability, toughness, durability. That's one of those intangibles that really makes players great. One of the reasons Tom Brady, one of his greatest attributes is the fact that he's barely ever missed games. If we think about it, Tom Brady, when he tore his ACL, I think he tore both, back in, 2008, 2009? That was the only time he missed games due to injury. I mean, of course he had the suspensions, but, I mean, guys, he's been in the league for how long? What is he, 43 now? And he's only missed that one season because he was hit low on a play? That's pretty insane. So, Kerryon Johnson has basically missed an entire season already in his first 2 years. And I really don't believe that the Lions are going to keep going with a guy they know is very injury prone. So, we do give a lot of credit here for, if you're a starting running back on a team, you get a shot. But for Kerryon Johnson, I do think his time is running out. I think they might draft a running back and try and go with that. But his health is just too much of a concern. Don't get me wrong, he's a talented guy. Definitely can put up some fantasy points, but he gets hurt way too often. And now to wrap up the segment, I want to talk about a guy who's sort of like a sleeper bust candidate. Not really one that I'd say, don't draft him. He's going to bust for sure. But when you want to keep your eye on guys, Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. And I know he's a guy we, regard as an elite tight end for fantasy football, elite tight end, in general. But, last year we have to remember there were no wide receivers on that team. So he had so many targets that were going to him because there really weren't other options. Again, tight end is so scarce, you want whoever you can get. I'm just saying, he definitely has potential to see a lot of regression, more than some people expect. He's getting older, of course, and Dallas Goedert, I think, is a threat to take some of those targets. He's a young guy. He's a solid guy. Definitely no scrub by any means. And I think he has potential to, he's the new Zach Ertz in Philadelphia. So they're trying to usher him in as well. If they, do what everyone expects them to do and they get some wide receiver help in the draft or sign some guys, then that's more targets away from Zach Ertz as well. So keep your eye on Zach Ertz because, he's a potential bust candidate. And I don't think he's going to be god-awful, of course, because he's just a purely talented guy. But I think, he's not a guy who's as efficient as, Travis Kelce. He's not as efficient as George Kittle. I think he needs a ton of targets. And I think if he loses a bunch of those targets to guys like Dallas Goedert, and maybe some new receivers that, build a rapport with Carson Wentz. Honestly, any receivers in general, I think a lot of regression is in store. So with that, guys, we're going to take a break. When we get back from the break, though, we're going to talk Tom Brady and his recent interview he had with Howard Stern. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Hey there, guys, and welcome back to the second to last segment of the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for today. Right now, we're going to go in and talk about the recent interview Tom Brady had with Howard Stern. Now, this is a very interesting interview. I encourage everyone to go listen to it just because, it's definitely an interview where Tom Brady seems very loose, and I don't think you get that very, very often. But I want to just touch on some points here, and one I found very interesting was when Tom Brady was asked if, does he think that he would have had the same success if he wasn't selected by Bill Belichick in that draft, in the 2000 draft. And Tom Brady's response is pretty interesting, so I want to read it, and then I want to just give my opinion on that whole situation. So Tom Brady says, I think it's a pretty crappy argument, actually, that people would say that. Because, again, I can't do his job, and he can't do mine. So the fact that you could say, would I be successful without him, the same level of success? I don't believe I would have been, but I feel the same vice versa as well. So essentially what Tom is saying here is that, okay, sure, you can make the argument that I wouldn't have been successful without Bill Belichick, but he wouldn't have been as successful without me. Now, I love this answer from Tom Brady because, it always seems like Tom Brady is sort of, he's the quiet one. Bill Belichick is so stern. I mean, Bill Belichick is definitely quiet, but he seems like he has sort of the power in that relationship, right? He always seemed, at least in my opinion, that he was running the show and he always gets the final say, which is true, literally, but, it's all about mentality and attitude, so that's what I'm referring to here. So for Tom Brady to say this, I think it was cool. It shows his confidence. He knows that he's arguably the best quarterback ever, and, he's sort of like he's sticking up for himself here, which I really, really like. Excuse me. Also, just to give my opinion on the subject. Now, while I agree with Tom Brady, I do think that they needed each other. I will say that Tom Brady needed Bill Belichick, I think, much more than Bill Belichick needed Tom Brady. Now, the reason I say this is because while, an amazing quarterback can carry a team to a Super Bowl, we just saw Patrick Mahomes do it. We've seen Tom Brady do it numerous times. The coach, he has impact on the entire team. The head coach selecting his staff, his scouts, drafting certain people. He has his hand in way more of the team than the quarterback does. The quarterback can be a great leader for the offense. He can be a great presence in the locker room, which is, that's great. But not every quarterback is that, but every coach has his hand in a ton of players and a lot of influence over the entire team. Bill Belichick, he's more of a defensive guy, and I mean, there's a reason that people say defenses win championships, right? So if that is to be believed, and if that is true, then it's pretty clear that Bill Belichick is the one more important for these Super Bowl wins than anyone else. Now, another reason why I believe that, that I think that Tom Brady would have needed Bill Belichick more than Bill needs him is because the work ethic that Bill Belichick installed in New England. Do your job. That whole motto, that whole mantra, that whole way of being in New England, the no nonsense, the no having fun, all work, no play type of mentality was created there, not by Tom Brady, but Bill Belichick and his program. I think without Bill Belichick, Tom Brady is not at all the same player. So while you can say, yes, he needs Tom Brady, Bill Belichick essentially created Tom Brady. So it's all his own doing. So it's all up to him, and it's because of him. So that in that regard, yes, he created something that he ended up needing in the end. But without him creating it, it wouldn't have been there for him to need anyway. So with this, while I love Tom Brady, sticking up for himself and, taking that stance on it, I don't think it's very, very equal. Like I mentioned earlier, Tom Brady was able to win Super Bowls because of Bill Belichick's defenses always being solid, and, him having every single player on board to that idea that, we are here to work. This is not supposed to be fun. We will go and win multiple Super Bowls, and like it's like it's easy Sunday morning, making breakfast or something. Like it's that normal to go win championships, and that's what they did. They went and won 6 rings. I think Bill Belichick has 7 himself. He won as a coordinator or an assistant at one point. So it's just a quarterback doesn't have enough impact on a team in general. And so that's why I think, this is on Bill Belichick for sure, because he also has GM sort of capabilities. And I think, he had to draft him. You know what I mean? I think it's a different scenario. We don't think of many coach and quarterback duos like we do of these, and to say, which one will succeed about the other, it doesn't happen that often. And I think, that's what makes this the whole split that much more entertaining, and that's why people are so drawn to this. For 20 years they've been together. For 20 years they've won together. They haven't done much losing at all. And it's going to be interesting to see it's basically, now, it's not becoming, at least in my opinion, of course it is a race to the Super Bowl, but what it might become is to see who just loses less. No, I don't think, a lot of people expect Belichick to be in the Super Bowl anytime soon. Definitely not next season, unless he gets an amazing quarterback. But, people have realistic expectations for Tom Brady that he should be making the Super Bowl with that sort of offense. I think what it will quickly become, should, that go wrong, is who's going to lose less and who's going to lose worse. I know they do face each other, so that I believe that they face each other. That would be awesome if they did. I'd have to double check that. I think they do. But, this becoming a rivalry is very, very interesting. I don't think we've ever seen something like this before. Definitely not in my time. I'm a younger guy, but, to see Tom Brady leaving, he mentions also that, he had something to prove. So I think that's very, very cool. And I think, but what I do think is that it's easier for a quarterback to go prove that he can win without the coach than it is for a coach to prove that he can win without the quarterback, because, like I said, there's 51 other guys on the team. The coach has to make sure that all other 51 guys are doing their job correctly and playing well, and he has solid players at every position, solid depth, deal with injuries, all that. And a quarterback, I'm not saying his job is easy or simple at all, but his job is to just be the quarterback. His job is not to draft or scout players. His job is not to make the tough decisions on benching who and starting who. His job is not to create plays, come up with, schemes for, game plans for the week. His job is just to be the quarterback and do the best he can at being quarterback. So while Brady might see more success in Tampa Bay than, Bill Belichick might see with this in New England, we have to remember also, guys, Bill Belichick's team is not that good right now. And you could argue, he's a coach, he's supposed to be getting all these players, that's his own fault. However, not every person you get is going to be perfect. Not everybody can hit 100% on the draft and win the Super Bowl every year. So that's, we have to be realistic here. Tom Brady left a team that people were saying was horrible. They said he had no receivers. They said his line was below average. They said he didn't have any help. So he's leaving that team, right? And now, what does Bill Belichick have to deal with? So Bill Belichick has no receivers, a bad offensive line. He has a historic defense, but he has no quarterback. So I think the degree of difficulty for Bill Belichick is way higher. So we should give him some wiggle room for that. Either way, it's going to be a very, very interesting battle to watch. I think it's going to be super entertaining. Definitely an excellent talking point. I can't wait for the next season to begin because, Tom Brady's not on the Patriots. I think that's, I know it was a shock, but I think it's even more of a shock than, people are, putting on it. I definitely imagine that he would retire as a Patriot also because of his age. We have to remember that the man is 42, 43 going to another team. Not only is he going to another team, but he's also that old. I think it's pretty insane, and he also has that fiery spirit. He mentions in the interview, you don't tell a painter to stop painting at 42. You don't tell a teacher to stop teaching at 42, something along those lines. So, he wants to keep going for as long as he possibly can, which I think is very, very interesting. I'd love to see, Tom Brady keep going, keep trying. If he believes that he can do it and believes he can play at a high level, if he continues to play at a pretty solid level, I'd love to see him keep going. And then later on down the line, when Belichick finds a new quarterback, hopefully Brady's not, that bad or has retired by then, and we can see truly Tom go head-to-head with Bill Belichick and his new quarterback. So, like I said, guys, I encourage you to go. I mean, even if you hate Tom Brady, go listen to it. He's not a bad guy. He's a nice guy. He's a great guy, actually. So even if you don't respect him for the cheating allegations and all that and playing for the Patriots, I think you can appreciate this interview here. It's definitely very, very interesting. So with that, though, guys, we are going to take a short break. Our time's running out here for this segment, so we'll take a short break, and when we get back, we'll wrap up the show with some wishes and some talking points. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Alrighty, guys, we now enter our last segment of the show today. Marcus's 3 wishes. We do the same thing every day on the show here at the end. I like to wrap it up with some hopes or wishes or desires that I have for the NFL season, fantasy football, or, things in general that may apply to what's going on in the world. Guys, I'm starting this week off, this wishes segment off again with something related to coronavirus, very, very similar to last week. I know I'm cheating. It's not a new wish, but it's still just as important as it was last week and very, very similar. Mike Florio posted recently on Pro Football Talk that Dez Bryant and Dak Prescott yet again have broken the stay-at-home orders in Texas and went out and worked out together again. Now, my wish still resonates the same. My wish is for all celebrities, athletes, actors, actresses, influencers, what have you, whatever you are, to please heed by these warnings and just set a good example for those following you. This is unacceptable at this point. It doesn't matter if there are 10 people working out with them, if they were 6 feet apart or not. The order stated that, all meetings outside of a single household, like unless you live with all those people, is prohibited. So why are you out there working out with other people in public? It's just irresponsible. It doesn't make sense. And they keep posting about it because they don't really care. Now, it's not as bad as last time. They were huddled together in the pictures and posts and what have you, but they're still posting about it. So clearly they haven't gotten the message. Excuse me. It's just very disappointing. They say the Dallas Cowboys are America's team. They have a huge, huge fan base that sees this kind of stuff. And, a lot of their fans are staying at home, not able to leave, not able to do things, not able to work, struggling, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just like, not that it's, excuse me, sorry guys. Not that it's extremely, it's not affecting us directly, but, what kind of example are you setting? We're all sitting at home, we're dying to get this over with, guys, people want to go back to work, this has really financially affected a ton of people, and, just to see, these rich athletes not treating it the same as us is really upsetting, because it almost feels like at this point that people like us have to, we have no choice. But these celebrities and athletes can go out and go train whenever they want, and it doesn't matter. So that's what's really upsetting, because God forbid any of them or their family members got the coronavirus, then they would look back on it and say, hey, maybe I shouldn't have been out. I was irresponsible, and give a fake apology, because that's what it would be. People are usually only sorry that they got caught doing things. They're not sorry that they did the things themselves. It's when people come out and they apologize for something without being caught or facing serious consequences. That's when you can bet on that apology. But, it's just my wish for everyone to just take this really seriously. If not for yourselves, for other people who could die catching this disease, guys. It's very, very serious. I myself know people personally, and a coworker of mine who's been affected by it, who's been diagnosed with COVID-19, and it's very serious and nothing to be joked around with or not taken seriously. So, that's my first wish for today. Yes, I repeated, the one from last week, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the message and trying to get this point across. So, that's wish number 1. Wish number 2 is actually sort of an extension of wish number 1. It's more of a hope, I guess. I guess it's a wish. But I wish for the NFL to take a firmer stance on all of this coronavirus stuff, because it seems that, players feel, if the players are feeling that there are no consequences for this sort of thing, maybe threatening some sort of penalty regarding the league might change their attitude and behavior, because, their actions could directly affect the league. It could directly affect other players. They could infect other players. They could, cause harm to other players. This sickness, even though, it affects healthier people less, can kill someone who's healthy. It's potentially deadly. So what they're doing is highly irresponsible. And also, since it brings a threat to the league as a whole, the NFL, the commissioner, can do something about that and punish players who aren't taking the protocol seriously, not following protocol, and not following stay-at-home orders. So that would be, I guess, my sort of pseudo wish number 2. It's just part of number 1, because this whole coronavirus thing, I know we all just wish for it to end as soon as possible, and it's not going to end any sooner with people not following the directions. So that's wish number 2. Basically, tied into wish number 1. They have to do the same thing, but yeah. So wish number 3 is actually football related. Well, more football related, because that is also football related, but this more has to do with football in general. But the wish is for the Seahawks to land Yannick Ngakoue. Now, of course, they have to trade for him at this point because he's not a free agent at this point in time, and they might have to give up significant draft capital for him. However, recently talks with Jadeveon Clowney have really stalled. People are saying that they might not even retain Jadeveon Clowney, and I think that what they're looking for is a significant pass rush. Well, in Yannick Ngakoue's career, he has more sacks than Jadeveon Clowney in less years. Now, Jadeveon Clowney has 32. Yannick Ngakoue has 37.5 in only 4 years. So I think right now that might be a better investment than going for Jadeveon Clowney. One, Jadeveon Clowney I think is going to fetch a higher price tag. And, Yannick Ngakoue is younger, and I think he has a lot to give. And I think, he's just a better pass rusher in general. I think Jadeveon Clowney's fall off, it was very significant. He had only 3 sacks last year compared to Yannick Ngakoue's 8, and Yannick Ngakoue was playing on a team he didn't really want to play for. I think going to Seattle and playing for Pete Carroll could light another fire in him, and we could see, he had a 12-sack season at one point. We could see him repeat that kind of success in the pass rush. Yannick Ngakoue has already stated he is not playing for the Jacksonville Jaguars, so it is in their best interest to trade him. They're probably going to trade him during the draft, but if the Seahawks can make something happen before then or during the draft, it doesn't matter. To make something happen before then, that'd be better, because I feel at the draft they'll have way more people on the line. And sometimes when you're making a decision like that in the moment, you can, in the spur of the moment, you can make more irrational decisions. So I think, Yannick Ngakoue to the Seahawks would be my wish number 3, just because I think he could help bolster that defense a ton. And with more sacks, that equals more fantasy points for the Seahawks defense. And they've been needing improvement because, they haven't been the same since the Legion of Boom was, sort of destroyed and separated. So Wish number 3 is for the Seahawks to land Unique Ngakoue as a replacement for losing Jadeveon Clowney. I think it could help them a ton. I know the Eagles fans out there want him, but I don't see that deal happening. I think they need to, invest a lot in wide receiver. So I don't think giving up draft capital for for a pass rusher would be the wisest thing to do. So with that, guys, I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Remember, please, to comment below, let us know what you think, and to follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. That really helps us, and we appreciate it. Guys, I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're staying healthy, and be careful out there, guys. This thing is constantly ongoing. We don't know when it's going to end, but we can get through it together. So thank you all, guys, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.